to the Quiet Warrior Show, where we help top leaders find their pathway to incredible success and a lifetime of happiness. Here is your host, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior.
Well, welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show. My name is Tom Dutta, and we're back again with part 2 of an epic series, a 3-part series. And well, this is a live stream, and we're live streaming on Facebook and YouTube and LinkedIn. And what is live streaming? We're interrupting the airwaves and letting people watch in the studio as we're taping. It's the next generation of broadcasting. You'll be able to find this production on the Quiet Warrior Show, so subscribe to that wherever you get your podcasts. As well, you'll see on the screen a button, subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's where we'll be putting out the YouTube video premiere of this when we're finished the 3-part series. So it's a pleasure now to call back into my studio, Mr. Bob Krulish. Hey, Bob, welcome back.
Good to be back. Thank you, Tom.
Well, those who didn't see or hear part 1, you'll want to go back and get the first part of the story. But Bob, we're going to dive right back in. And I'm calling this the MANIC, Bob, the dark night of the soul. And for those who know what that is in the hero's journey, which is a narrative by Joseph Campbell, that's really a big part of my show. In the last episode, we talked about Mischievous, Bob, a man who's being called the answer key, who has a gifted level of knowledge and intelligence, who grew up and had a bit of a troubled childhood with a father who left. He went out into the world trying to prove something, and he excelled at so many things. And he was given honors, student government, and was fighter pilot training and grooming to be the next senator. But there was something missing along the way, Bob. You stumbled and things kind of disappeared one step at a time. And then finally you enrolled in the Army, where you were looking for something, a father figure, you called it. And well, that ended, and now you're back into society. So we'll begin the story in the part I call, just looking at my notes here, that California. There was a move to California, and then your mom began working at a firm, a stock brokerage firm. Why don't you start there? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, she started working at the stock brokerage firm. I was still trying to discover who I was and who I was going to be. And I had not gone back to college yet. I was just kind of in between, and I was really struggling to figure out, what I can do to earn a living and to, have some meaning in my life. And fortunately, the person she worked for at that stock brokerage firm was nice enough to interview me and offer me a job as a stockbroker, even though I hadn't completed college. And I was really excited about that. The challenge, though, was that I had this self-esteem issue, or I had this abandonment issues for my dad. And being a stockbroker, as you might know, Tom, is just all about making cold calls when you're beginning. And so I was getting rejected left and right. And eventually it just got to be too psychologically difficult for me. I didn't really understand all those dynamics at the time. Then I understand them now. And it just caused me all kinds of problems psychologically. And I eventually I was fired because I could not get the work done.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bob. Again, everybody, I want to bring to the forefront, Bob wrote a book called, Bob, tell us the title of the book. Do you have it with you there, the physical book by any chance?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Just hold it up.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, I'm going to full screen. You just hold it up there. I'm going to put you back on full screen. For those watching the video, you'll see it. For those listening, you certainly can get the title. Bob, read the title out.
Yeah, When Screams Become Whispers, One Man's Inspiring Victory Over Bipolar Disorder.
That's awesome. And so thanks, Bob. We'll find out later how to get that book. But going back to the story, everybody, the story unfolds. You heard in the first chapter, sort of Bob from his childhood up till now. And the reason why I wanted to start here was, man, when I read your book, Bob, and that's how we met, there's threads in every part of that book where I'm looking squarely down a shotgun at my own life going, that's incredible. Mm-hmm. And so this thing about being hired How old were you as a stockbroker when you started there?
I was only about 23 or 24 years old.
Wow. Well, that's first of all to get to Wall Street and to get into that. And as we talked about last time, the high achiever thing, unless you're getting A pluses or exceptional results, you felt, as you said, like somewhat of a failure. But I would say, most would say less than 1% of people make it to Wall Street, man. So it's like, dude, what are you pretending not to know? That was a hell of a feat. But the thing that people might not know about you if they didn't listen to the first episode, by the way, everybody go back and hear the first chapter of the story, is they called you the answer key. So you had this incredible intelligence. And I think you mentioned that you didn't have the background, but some of the guys getting into that firm had masters or something. So
sure. They had degrees in finance and whatnot.
Yeah. And you didn't, but you had this way about you where you were able to believe in working hard and your aptitude. And Dan, I think that was his name, your boss, he said, write the exam, level 7 exam. And dude, you passed it. Which is incredible. If anybody knows about brokerage, my background is financial services, spent time in banks and sold mutual funds and things. These aren't easy things to do. And so there you were, and you excelled and you passed that. And I want to read something that I wrote down here. It says on a cold call, I wrote on the cold call, there was somebody who was elevating and yelling at you, insulting you. And you wrote that I felt shame, anxiety, and I couldn't pick up again. I want to draw a parallel, not the same situation, but we went through a financial challenge in our life, mid 2000s. It's in my book. And I got pulled into a direct selling company. The owners were in the United States, and they wanted me as a Canadian businessman, to help open it in our market. I didn't know anything about direct selling, but man, the one thing I had to do is get on a phone and dial numbers and talk to people. And here's what happened, Bob.
Yeah, how did that go?
Well, I want to keep the spotlight on you, but I want to say this for a reason, because I related to it, that to get to what's called a diamond level, that's the top level of being a distributor, is less than 5%, 2% of people do it. I became a diamond. I actually became a diamond with no experience in direct selling. But after a short period of time, I started feeling this rejection. The calls people were rejecting me. Others who were in my team were coming on the phone, and 3-way calls, they called it. And I remember one day calling my upline, they called them distributor, a fellow who made a lot of money in the industry. I said, I don't know what it is, but I just can't pick up the phone. And I've been in sales all my life, Bob. In fact, as an exec, that background has been sales too. And it was, when I read your book, it was that thread. It was that in my home growing up, there was yelling and screaming. There was all sorts of anger. There was a lot of rejection. And my subconscious mind had this story and this paralysis I would feel getting on a call when it wasn't positive. And I just couldn't face it. So let's get back into this. Some cocaine. Tell us about that. Most people know Wall Street has some white powder. You got involved in that a little bit, right?
I got involved in the white powder, and I found it to be, all good. I just, I found it to be, made it easier for me to make calls, made it easier for me to feel better about myself. It became something I was addicted to. The thing that I didn't know at the time, and I don't discover for a long time, is this whole idea about bipolar disorder. And so I'm not realizing that I'm also treating bipolar disorder with this cocaine, and that I'm not only treating this ability to make phone calls, but I'm also going through these episodes, these bipolar episodes, and my mind is just racing with all kinds of destructive thoughts and pain and anguish, from my childhood, and I'm just trying to shut it up. I'm really Pink Floyd's got its great song called "Comfortably Numb," and that's what I found myself doing, was getting comfortably numb.
Wow, that's amazing. I remember just now flashing back to watching the movie Wall Street, one of my favorites, and so many other films. There's one with McConaughey in it, and looking at these guys and having grown up and known some of the people who worked on Wall Street, now you've got me thinking again about, many of them are caught up in sex and drugs,
Right.
porn and all these things. But, we find that behind that is mental illness. Behind
Yes.
that is a hidden, I call them wolves or monsters, these voices, these things we're trying to calm. I want to thank you for being vulnerable and talking about that. So here we are in this story, and you're at this brokerage firm. I mean, you gave us the outcome. You were let go. Sales, you couldn't get your sales to the level, and no fault of your own, but there was more going on in your head at that time. And so I want to move forward to, I guess when we talk about this part of the story, I use the word manic Bob, and something started to appear. Before that, I think you had a bout with Faith. Just to quickly tell us about that. There was somebody in the firm before you left it, the stock brokerage, a guy named Mark. Tell us about what happened with that.
Yeah, Mark was interesting character. He sat right behind me. You're in a bullpen.
Yeah.
So you're just out there with a whole bunch of other brokers, and all you're doing is cold calling. And Mark would be just so good at this. He would just never put the phone down. He literally never put the phone down. He'd hang up and dial, never put it down. Mine was always down. I never picked it up. And he was very good at what he did. And he was a man of faith, And my life was more a man of the world. I was trying to be everything that the world wanted me to be. And so, like you had mentioned, sex and drugs was a big part of my life, and different partners coming to lunch with me. I would have a different gal come and have lunch with me just about every week, if not every other day. And my friend Mark was, at the time, he was more annoying than he was a friend. He would actually tell me how I'm going to hell by the way I live. And I remember saying stuff like, well, it's better than living in hell, being married to only one person, like you are.
I'm sure that went over well.
Like a bomb, like a lead balloon. And we ended up actually going to learn about the brokerage firm on Wall Street, and stayed out in Manhattan together on Wall Street for a month. I had to share a hotel room with him, and I hardly ever saw him because we would go to work, and then I'd go get drunk and party all night.
Yeah.
And he'd be up talking to his wife and reading his scriptures. And I was like, this guy's life just sucks.
All right, let me jump in there, and thanks for your honesty. And I know God's looking down on us now, and he's shaking his head, but he's realizing there's a saying, and I went through this in my life, that sometimes I believe God strips us, and sometimes we're stripped of more, and at the point we're stripped to having nothing because we need to be taught something. And your life was all about, I wrote down the word here, significance. And, you had to have the biggest paycheck, and the word love wasn't in the equation. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because, again, I look back at my life, and that was me, 31 when I became a CEO, and I had to have the biggest paycheck, biggest car, always getting accolades. I was still seeking and searching something. Yeah. So you moved to Utah, and I'll just read this. There was something in the story about life is good. 98% of people are young, they're Mormons, and you became part of that faith. And there was this one line that stood out for me. It says, you got baptized, and a strange feeling, you said, his love was the only thing I needed. I had it now. Nothing to chase, only a path to follow. I love that. And it was at that point of the story, Bob, that I went, okay, now I can get off the edge of my seat. This train wreck of a life. Now there's going to be some sense of calm and peace, and this man's going to be happy. And then it didn't happen. So let's get into the next 8 or 10 minutes of the part of the story I call manic. Yeah. There's one scene in the book where you just lose it on your son, and your daughter, your wife. You're waking up in bed sweating with fear. And then you went to see a doctor. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, at first I was just not sure what was going on. We believed that I just had like an anxiety attack, more of a panic attack at that time, but my anger was just severe, and although I never hit my children like I had been hit myself as a child. Um, I was punching holes in the doors and in the walls, screaming and yelling. I remember my daughter telling me that after I did get kicked out, eventually I get kicked out of my home, that she said, "Dad, what we all noticed right away when you weren't there was how quiet it was, how
Yeah.
quiet the house is now without you there." And I thought, well, thanks a lot, honey. Thanks for letting me know that. Right back at you. But she was so right. And then when I saw a doctor, this is the interesting thing about bipolar is that the doctor thought I was having bouts of depression and anxiety and put me on a medication, an SSRI, an antidepressant.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is that if you have bipolar disorder, it's in the medical books that if you take an antidepressant without a mood stabilizer for the bipolar, you'll get manic. And my doctor did not diagnose me as having bipolar. She thought I had, a need for an antidepressant alone. And that antidepressant put me in a manic episode that lasted about 3 years, Tom. Normally, an episode lasts about 4 to 5 months.
Wow.
But for as long as I took that antidepressant, I was manic. And there's where some real destruction came.
Well, everybody, we're talking to Bob Krulish. The book we'll mention it again in a moment. It's on the screen. Bob, my heart just grew 3 times, man. That part of the story, and that's what happened when I read that part of the book. That's why I'm calling this part 2 of the interview manic. I just shook my head. I know I'm not suggesting that all doctors make these mistakes, but everybody, you have to take back. This is a teaching moment, your life, and look deeper into everything when you're prescribed medication or something's going on. There's always another answer. Going on an antidepressant and what you just told me, I wrote that down on my paper. It's funny you're telling me that you could go into this manic state for as long as you're on an antidepressant if you have untreated other issues, bipolar. And we'll get into the bipolar in just a moment. So you're on this medication, and I wrote down here the last bullet. I think it was chapter 17 in the book, and there's a story about a Hummer and these really weird things you started doing, like going shopping for stationery. Tell us about a couple of those things.
Well, you get to say in your mania, you really believe you are, smarter than anybody, more capable than anybody. I jokingly said the only difference between me and God when I'm manic is that God never thought that he was me. But I constantly thought I was godlike, and I behaved like I was. And I was even going to put the word creator on my business card to define who I was.
Wow.
Because I was flipping houses at the time and I was creating deals, even though none of them made any sense and made any money. I felt like I was this supreme kind of a creator person.
Yeah. You hold the book up again there, Bob. When screams become whispers. Bob, just going to jump in there and riff on this. I wrote some notes on that. Everybody, when you get into the book, you got to get the book. I encourage you to get it. Whether you have bipolar or you're around somebody or you're caring for somebody, everybody on the planet should know about what bipolar is. That chapter 17, it's called The Last Bullet. And what you just heard Bob say about putting the word creator on his business card and deals, we don't have time to get into all the nitty gritty, but I'm going to spoil the thunder a little bit here. That okay. You were telling clients to sell a property that was worth $150,000 for $250,000 and trying to convince them that it's going to happen. I mean, I'm reading that. I'm going like, what are you trying to do here? Are you idiot? And here's the thing. This is such a great teaching moment, Bob, that if I met you in that situation, I would not know that you deal with mental illness. I wouldn't know that. And yet I would think that this guy, that's just what he believes. And maybe you encourage me and maybe I'll do that. But I would blame you if that blew up. I blame you personally for that decision that you had me make. We will learn in the next episode more about why some of those actions weren't yours and why bipolar is such an important topic to understand. So the Hummer thing just got me laughing. I mean, you obviously thought this business wasn't go great. So what you went and bought a Hummer for your wife or something?
No, actually, I'd lost my job at a big insurance firm where I had done some pretty miraculous work because of this manic outbreak. And then some friends were flipping houses and I got into that business. At least I pretended to be in that business. And one of the things was that I wasn't doing well, but I saw on TV an investor flipping houses and he did really well. And he had two things. He had a Hummer and he had a helicopter. And so my first reaction was, I need a helicopter and a Hummer.
Yeah.
So let me go get the Hummer first. And I talked to my wife at the time about it, and she's like, no way, and very candid about this. There's no way you're going to buy this Hummer. You're not making any money doing what you're doing. And I can't believe that the Hummer is going to be the thing that turns it around. So in my mania, I really kind of heard her say, sure, go ahead and get it. Just don't let me know about it. And what I did is I took my Camry. I had a Toyota Camry, and I drove it down to the Hummer dealership. And instead of trading in the Camry, I bought the Hummer and kept the Camry. And then I immediately parked the Hummer behind the dealership. There was a grocery store. And I parked the Hummer in there, and I walked back to my Camry and drove my Camry home. Like nothing happened. And then in the morning, to go do my real estate work, I would drive my Camry to the Hummer, parked at this grocery store, spend all day in the Hummer, pretending to be a real estate investor. And I would drive. And that went on for months.
Man.
Until she finally found out that I bought a Hummer months ago. And I've kept it from her.
Yeah, I think this all came out with how you, you would try to intercept the mail before it got to the house.
I would try to intercept
and then the
mail,
invoice came. I almost fell off my chair laughing, and I'm not laughing at you. This, by the way, everybody, is an exact depiction of what sometimes a manic episode can look like. And I want to digress for a minute here, Bob, because my head went on a journey somewhere that when I turned age 21, early part of my career, I became a branch manager at a large bank, one of the top 5 banks in Canada. It was my first role as a manager. And I fast-tracked my career, as I told you, because I thought I was smart, but I was driven, and it was for the reasons much like you said, alcoholic father, having to prove myself. The rules were wrong. And they gave me this branch, and I won't divulge where and who, but the assistant manager was a young woman who had bipolar. Now, back then, there was this was in the early days when the internet just came together. And back then, they didn't give me any training. I didn't know what it was. And they had put this woman almost like out to pasture in this small branch, so that hoping that she would just go away and there were some bizarre things that I encountered. And I didn't know how to manage her. And yet I didn't really know anything about, when you say there's the decisions that you made, some of them weren't your own. We'll get into that more. And so it just reminded me, I went back, he took me back, 25 years, man. And I honor you for this story, because I was carrying the weight of some of that, some guilt, because eventually the bank had me move her out into something. And I felt again that, here I am changing somebody's career. And I felt guilty about it. Reading your book brought that back, and it gave me some peace that it wasn't me. So thank you. So the Hummer one, we know there's something about I'm just going to throw this out there. Bob went and bought $1,000 worth of stationery because he thought that would help his business. You want to hire him as a business consultant, because first thing he's going to do is buy $1,000 worth of stationery and tell you to put in your house. Now let's get serious. We're heading to chapter 1920, around there in the book. We have a few minutes left in this episode 2, and suicidal thoughts something came together, and then losing it all, including something about divorce. Just tell us more about what happened.
Yeah, it got to the point where I had just been so destructive. I mean, at one time, I needed to pay a contractor. I didn't have the money. So I went to one bank and wrote a check and cashed it, went to the other bank and wrote a bad check. And basically, I was check kiting, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
And the branch manager, was about to call the police on me. And what they did is they took all my money, any money that I had, and any accounts that were tied to me, my wife's, my kids' savings, and sucked it all out. And so I was very destructive. And so eventually I get, kicked out of the house, and I'm getting divorced. And there's I sign away everything in my mania, and I find myself in without anything. I really at the time I'd say I was a millionaire, and I went from being a millionaire to being really homeless within a matter of about 6 months.
Yeah, I get emotional with the story, but the good news is it gets better. There is another chapter, everybody, that's coming. That's going to be the rise. And I just want to say, as we wrap up this part of the episode, Bob, that I love the way you're being so open and honest about this, because it really gets people to understand what bipolar is. It takes us into that in a very different way. I want to share with you a personal story before we wrap up, that when I was working to do my TED Talk, as I mentioned to you, I had an accident, I had a brain injury, memory loss, and all sorts of cognitive issues. And well, I ended up going into get a help from a speaking coach because I couldn't deal with it. And at that moment in time, I had this armor on, and she was trying to break that armor. And she told me that for 2 years she was strapped to her home. She was there because she was misdiagnosed with bipolar. She wasn't diagnosed properly, and that cracked me wide open. And that led me to bringing out a story I had been keeping about stress and my father and all that. And that led me to, for the first time, having the courage to walk on stage and do a TED Talk and reveal that part of my life.
Wow,
as a business leader, it was something I feared because people would look down on me for talking about that. And that's why, the topic of bipolar really hit my heart, because I want to just tell you this, that while bipolar is not something I was diagnosed with, there's threads in your story, man, that, because I deal with generalized anxiety. I have depression. I've been dealing with a psychiatrist for that. I had my first suicidal thoughts in the last 2 years. That I was put on medication, and it's a cocktail of things you got to keep trying and trying and trying. And so there are threads in your story that all of us can relate to, whether we have anxiety or bipolar or stress. We don't have to be mentally ill to understand that this could be important, because it could be part of our lives.
Yes.
As I wrap this up and we let you go, just want to read this. Bob wrote this to me when I asked him if he'd consider being on the show. Everybody, he said, months after I lost everything, I found myself meeting with a psychiatrist, and he started a new journey. But prior to that, on one desperate day, you found yourself nearly dying from suicide. And there were those moments. Just tell us about that. Tell us about that. Put us back into that dark place.
Yeah, there was this point in time when I had no hope, and I call it infinite hopelessness, is the depression side of bipolar, and I just couldn't see a way out. I couldn't get out. I couldn't see a way out, and so I had a lot of suicidal ideation. I thought about it constantly, and I was in the process of attempting suicide twice. The one time that comes to mind was when I lived near a bus stop on a big hill, and it seemed apparent to me that the best way I could end things was to jump out and in front of this bus as it came roaring down the hill. And I got to the bus stop that morning to do that. And in a split second, I just thought of one of my kids, and I just thought, I can't have him burying me. I just can't do it. But I had about 1 foot out on the road, and I was ready to end it all. It's just, you have so much pain in your mind. You have so much noise going on in your head that you just don't know how to stop it, Tom.
No, I understand, and thank you for sharing that. I won't get into my episode, but I hear you that you get to a point where when you can't see the future, and one of my mentors is Tony Robbins. You had a thread of that in your book, which is another thread connected to my story.
Yeah.
And I remember Tony saying that people, if you're going to commit suicide, you're going to do it. You're not going to think about it. You're not going to stand on a bridge for 3 hours. You're going to do it. And there's people, he drew it on a board, Crazy 8. He said people live a life on this Crazy 8 where they're happy and they're not happy, but some go off the 8 and take their life. And I've been at some of his live events. I've done all his university programs where he would work with people in the audience, much like you experienced. And he would say, who in here today, and picture 3,000 people in the room, tried to commit suicide last night, or had suicidal thoughts in the last 24 hours, and people would stand up. And you just, so it's a very important topic, everybody, to understand that suicidal thoughts, from what I've learned, is you can visualize taking your own life, but I didn't realize till I had a moment seeing my daughter hanging by a rope in her dorm room in university across country. That was one of my thoughts. And when I processed it with my psychiatrist, they told me, they said, suicidal thoughts are not just thoughts of you being harmed by yourself, but other people being harmed. I had no idea what, and yet that was all just things going on in my brain because things had changed. And so I want to acknowledge you for sharing that. I mean, I didn't drag it out of you for pity or anything, but man, I mean, we'll end the episode too on this, that, there you were at the darkest space, wanting to take your own life. And you did do Unleash the Power Within, which was Tony's program. So we're going to take up on that in the next part. Okay. And so what happens next? Everybody, I'm going to wrap up on this, that we're doing a 3-part series with amazing author and teacher Bob Krulish on living with bipolar. And this episode was called MANIC Bob, the Dark Night of the Soul. Please make sure that you subscribe to the show. You find the YouTube premiere when it comes out. This is just live taping we're doing now to honor it. Watch the first, second episode. Episode 3, we're going to be calling Bipolar Bob. The hero rises and becomes the answer key. And so, Bob, thank you for being here today. Will you come back for episode 3?
My pleasure. Absolutely. Look forward to it.
All right, everybody. Thank you. Everybody, live with passion, live with purpose, and live that life that you deserve and desire. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Quiet Warrior Show. Create is a motive-based leadership development firm. www.kreat.ca